We talked yesterday, Parshat Beshalach, Bnei Israel are on their way. They're out of Egypt. They have one, we could say, been born to God, but they are not completely free of the Egyptians, which of course we know happens in Parshat Beshalach, this week's Parsha, with the splitting of the sea. And there is a moment there at the splitting of the sea, which is a moment that really reveals a lot of what's going on. And it begins in chapter 14, verse 10, Perek Yudal, Pasuk Yud, Uparo Hikriv. Paro is getting close to Bnei Israel, Vaisu Bnei Israel Teinehem. They look up. Bnei Mitzrayim Nosea Acharehem. The Egyptians are following them. They ran out of Egypt. The Egyptians pushed them out. Paro said to Moshe and Aaron, I never want to see you again. The Egyptians were using Vayechazak. They were pushing them out to go quickly, but here the Egyptians are running after them. Vayitzaku Bnei Israel El Adonai, and Bnei Israel cry out to God. There's an interesting thing here that I can't remember where I heard. I think it was on a Drisha, has a very nice, was it Drisha? Was it Matan? It's a very nice podcast, lengthy podcast about the Parsha. They talked about, somebody talked about, I can't remember who, how originally when Bnei Israel cried out was Vayanuchu. All they could do was sort of moan at that point earlier on after the first Paro died, whether they were moaning as a moment of relaxation, whether they were moaning as a worry of if the next Paro is going to be even worse than the first one. Here it's Vayitzaku. Here they have at least attained a sense of voice. They can cry out to God to help them as they're terrified. But even in their terror, they call out to God, but they also come to Moshe. They complain to Moshe. And this is the first of many complaints. We'll see maybe a little bit more tomorrow. What happens when you're actually in the desert? Vaitzaku, they go and they complain to Moshe, why didn't you let us die in the desert? Why'd you have to bring us why'd you have to bring us out of Egypt? There are graves in Egypt. Why'd you have to get our hopes up? And they say, right, seems to be that many of them maybe didn't want to leave. In Pasuk Yud Bet, this is what we said to you. Chadal mimenu v'navdad Mitzrayim ki tov lanu avodat Mitzrayim mimutenu bamidbar. Let us be. We will serve the Egyptians. For it's better us to serve the Egyptians and die in the wilderness, is what they say. Die in the wilderness is even worse, at least, than we would be alive. We raised this question back in the book of Breshit when with Yosef and Binyamin, and Yosef is threatening Binyamin with avdut, with slavery. He doesn't say, I'm going to kill Binyamin when they find the Gavia, when they find the cup in Binyamin's bag. What does he say? He says, he will be my Eved. He will be my slave. And yes, of course, it's midah keneged midah. It's measure for measure. The brother sold Yosef as a slave, and here he's threatening Binyamin in the same situation with slavery. But there's also sort of this larger question. If you're a slave, is that really being alive? If you're a slave, is that life? And so the threat to Yosef, yes, we didn't kill him with our own hands. We're selling him into slavery, but is he really alive? When the Jews are under Paro and under the slave masters in Egypt, are they really alive? So here, Bnei Israel, and they'll have this many times, this nostalgia, this pretend like life was perfect as I was sitting next to eating the cucumbers and the melons in Egypt, as we'll read about later. So they have that nostalgia back. Avodat, Mitzrayim is better. And then Moshe says something wonderful. He says, you guys don't worry about it. You just sit there and don't do anything. Just sit there and wait for God. See what God is going to do for you, because that which you saw, for that you see the Egyptians today, you will not see them again. And he says, Hashem yilachem lachem v'atem tacharishun. You, God will go to battle for you. You just sit here. You just hold. You don't have to do anything. And that's what Moshe says to them is going to happen. But God's answer to Moshe is that's not what's going to happen. God says to Moshe something that's very opposite. God says to Moshe in the next verse, Ma titzak elai, daber el b'nei Yisrael vayisau. Moshe says, stay here. God is going to perform miracles for us. And what does God say to Moshe? No. You want a miracle? You need to bring about the miracle. You need to make it happen. You want something to happen. It's not going to happen by you sitting there. It's only going to happen by you going. And that is a critical difference. And there's a Rashi that sort of emphasizes them, where Rashi has God saying to Moshe, Kedai zechut avot, the merit of the ancestors should be enough for the sea to split. And the fact that you left Egypt and ventured with me into the desert without knowing, into the wilderness. You didn't know whether there would be food. You didn't know whether we would be bread. You wouldn't know what would happen, but you trusted in me. That should be enough to open the sea, for the sea to split for you guys. And so what God here says to Moshe is a very different thing. Moshe says, sit back and wait. And what does God say? Waiting isn't going to be a miracle. You want a miracle to happen, you need to take that first step. And I think about it sometimes within the context of, let's say, modern day Zionism, where you have obviously a large portion of the religious Jewish community who oppose Zionism, and they said, we'll go back to Israel when the third Beit HaMikdash comes down from the heavens, whether it be in fire. We'll go back to Jerusalem when God ordains it as such. And the Zionist movement and the religious Zionists, what did they say? Don't tell me about Gemaras and Ksubos, and don't tell me about different things. We can't wait for God. If we want to be a secure and flourishing people, if we want the Messiah to come, it's not Tacharishun. It's not us remaining silent. We need to do things, to take steps to allow that to happen. Right? We know the mountain and Muhammad and all that, right? You have to take that step. You have to move forward, is what God says to Moshe at this pivotal moment. God will help those who help themselves. Luck comes to those who work hard, right? If you don't try, you don't get any luck. If you work hard, you'll get lucky a few times. That's the way it is. You don't make any sales if you don't make any calls, whatever phrase you want to use. That's what God says to Moshe here. You want a miracle? No. Miracles are not going to happen for no reason. Think back, we talked about this in the context of Hanukkah, I believe, at some point. Same thing. The Maccabim, right? If they didn't search for and find that flask of oil, if they didn't light the Hanukkah candles on the first night, saying, I don't know what's going to happen on day 8. I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, but at least we have for a few days. At least we have for today. That is the message of, or one of the messages, at least according to Rashi and many of the commentaries, of the Kriyat Yam Suf. We think of God doing it, but of course, it's not just God. It comes about because Bnei Israel are willing to venture in. Now, that idea, which is in the text of the Torah, obviously takes on new life in the person of Nachshon ben Aminadav, not a well-known character in the Torah, not a very important character in the Torah. I'm not trying to take anything away from him, but obviously the Midrash, which talks about him from the tribe of Yehuda being the first one to walk in and to step in, and Midrashim that say the water goes all the way up to his neck, and then the sea splits, that he embodies for the Midrash that idea. The miracle doesn't just happen. The miracle happens because the Jews are willing to venture forward. Read much later, Yirmiyahu says, praising the generation, very often the generation that left Egypt gets a bad rap. We talked about in the past, we'll talk about in the future, they can't transcend their upbringing, they can't leave behind their slave mentality, and I'm not blaming them, I didn't have to go through that. The trauma of what they went through, they get a lot of bad rap, but what did they show? What does Yirmiyahu say? Lech techacharai bamidbar be'eretz lo zura. They had the faith to follow me into the desert, into a land with no habitation, whether you wanted to understand Midbar as a desert or Midbar as a wilderness. They had a sense of faith to move forward. And that's what Moshe tells them here. And that's what they do. And that is an incredible act of bravery on part of by Bnei Israel. And as a result of that, the miracle happens. And that's one way of understanding Kriyat Yam Suf. It's a miracle that happens, and God does something fanciful and wonderful, but it only happens because Bnei Israel walk into the water. It's interesting, and in different places it's sort of stated, but Ramban Nachmanides stresses a different idea. Going back to Pirkei Avot, which talks about how certain things were created, Bein Hashmashot, that certain things were already sort of set in stone in creations, things that wouldn't happen yet. And the idea that God works in nature, what the Ramban, what Nachmanides says, and one of his messages of the Kriyat Yam Suf is, this was built in from the get-go. Right? This is not like God at the last end changing his mind and deciding to split the sea. This was something that God had intended, that God knew was going to happen. and Bnei Israel are there, but God is waiting for that moment to happen. It's a very different sort of idea that, right, the Rashi is pushing it much more. The miracle is going to happen from God, but we are the ones who have to bring it. You want to have a third Beit HaMikdash? You want to have a place for Jews? Well, you need to bring it about. The Ramban says it a little differently. It's much more about God, and it's built into nature. It's built into nature, and we need to. We're there at the right moment. So the way the wind would work, and the way the sea would split, and that all has been built into nature, and God is waiting for the critical moment to allow that to happen. It's a very sort of different one. It's much more about God, which is much more about Bnei Yisrael. When we talk about the splitting of the sea, just for a couple more moments, we talk about it. Bnei Israel here are scared, and they're worried, and they reveal that sense of anxiety, and we understand that sense of anxiety. They don't know, and it's something that they're going to see over, and we're going to see over and over again. The unknown is really scary for them. They have never ventured out anywhere. We talked about yesterday. That's why they don't go up straight through today would be the Gaza Strip. They don't go straight up through Gaza into Israel to fight the enemies because they're not ready to fight them. But here they have this shining moment of the Kriyat Yam Suf. And the Kriyat Yam Suf is one of the places, one of the words that's used here. The rabbis have go in tremendous ways with Kriyat Yam Suf. Kriyat Yam Suf, actually, it's not called, I once heard from somebody, that's not called Kriyat Yam Suf. Kriya, kufresh ayin in the Hebrew means to tear. It's not called that until about the 15th or the 16th century. The Torah talks about Bekia, which is more making it into a valley. But it talks about Bnei Israel walking betoch hayam bayabasha. Bnei Israel walk within the water, right? They go into where the water was, and it's yabasha. It's now dry land. Now, really, what the Torah is stressing there by Yam versus Yabasha, if you go back to the creation story, Yam means the sea, the oceans, and Yabasha means a land. But Yabasha means dry land, and the rabbis, based upon this, they start a almost like a project of trying to uncover how many miracles were at the sea, that they're what they call nes betoch nes. Not only did God split the waters, but Bnei Israel didn't have to walk through the mud and the filth and the seaweed and whatever else would have been on the sea. They were walking on dry land. They were walking on nice, I don't know, Persian rug or something, however you want to say it. And they go through and they create all of these different sort of miracles. Oh, all of a sudden the water became sweet and they could drink from it. All of a sudden there were like fruits. Did they go in all together? Were there 12 different rows for each of the different tribes of Bnei Israel? And what Chazal is trying to do is this miracle. It's trying to give us a sense of understanding as to how remarkable it was when Bnei Israel are terrified and they're scared and they're worried and they think their life is over and they should have just stayed in Egypt. And we have a complete transition. Thinking back, I don't know, maybe it's Yosef's flag of Israel that's in front of us. It makes me think of sort of the 6-Day War. I wasn't alive for the 6-Day War, so I don't know what happened. I know what happened, but the sense that people talk about the anxiety before the war, the fear, the people believed the state of Israel was going to be destroyed, and it went right from Yagon va'anacha, from worry and anxiety and sorrow, to being a great triumph where the Jewish people were victorious. And that's this moment of the splitting of the Red Sea. And what it is for our people on a different level is Yetziat Mitzrayim. When the Jews leave Egypt, that's like the birth. That's like the Jewish people being born. But when a baby is born, it's still attached to its mother. And I heard the great teacher of Tanakh, Rav Yoel Ben Nun, who said that the splitting of the Red Sea is like the cutting of the umbilical cord. When they left, the baby is out, it's alive, it's breathing, but it's still attached to its mother. There's still one more act to help make it, or at least start to place it on a road of independence. The first physical act that needs to be done is you have to cut that umbilical cord. And this is cutting the cord. The Kriyat Yam Suf is Bnei Israel and Egypt are done. Now, a baby's far from being done with its mother and with its parents, but that's what's happening here. And Bnei Israel, at this point, when they leave Egypt with all the fanciful miracles, it happens much like a baby's got to push out of the birth canal. Bnei Yisrael here push themselves out. They're willing to move in. And as a result, they walk in and a great miracle happens, one that we remember each and every day through our liturgy in the tefillah of Shacharit each and every day.